Welcome to the AA Podcast, our little corner of the web where we are not afraid to discuss tough questions like,
when did nutrition, health, movement, and stress management become alternative medicine?
Where we embrace challenges in all aspects of life to become healthier and stronger versions of ourselves.
And where food and movement are the best kinds of medicine, and cooking meals at home is a revolutionary act.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the AA Podcast. This is Ashley Olson.
And I'm Andrea Crane.
We are going to talk about something that might be a little controversial today. Maybe.
Everyone just turned their iPods up. I
Yes.
said iPod. Maybe I meant iPhone. Maybe I'm old. Yeah. Do they make iPods anymore?
I think they do. I don't know.
Okay.
Remember those days where you had to download to your iPod?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I remember my shuffle. I still miss that thing. That
Yeah.
little tiny. Yeah.
Yeah.
My Nano. Yeah.
I bet they come back.
I used to be an early adopter back in the day.
early.
Now I'm just like a non-adopter. So
Exactly. Well, before we get into our discussion today, we are going to share our weekly Bible verse, and we are in the midst of Pentecost. So
Yep.
we are going to take a couple of verses from Acts, and mine is coming from Acts 4:31, and it says, "And when they had prayed, the place in which they were gathered together was shaken, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and continued to speak the word of God with boldness."
All right, and mine is also in the Pentecost vein is from Acts 2:17. In the last days God said, "I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, your old men will dream dreams."
Love it. Well, Andrea, our topic today was one that probably would have gotten us kicked off the
Oh my gosh.
interwebs 5 years ago.
Yes. Whoa. Yeah.
And we would have been deemed all kinds of things.
Oh yeah.
But we are going to be talking about the compound, I guess. Is that the right
Mhm.
term?
Yep. Yep.
Ivermectin.
Yes, and we can in fact say the Nobel Prize-winning compound ivermectin.
Uh-huh.
This drug, I just want to clear up some things because there's been some interesting legislation in a handful of states about the availability of ivermectin, and I just want to answer some questions that I have heard a lot of people ask, especially in my state. And so we're going to address that, but I want to give everybody a foundation in terms of, what this drug does and kind of theories on how it may work and what it may be useful for, because if you've only ever heard the narrative that this is, oh gosh, what do
Horse
they call it,
face.
horse
Horse
paste,
face.
dog wormer, whatever. um
Dewormer.
I'm
Yep.
sorry, but that's just such a load of crap. This this
Well, it's just
this drug,
ignorance.
it's absolutely ignorance, and it's allowing yourself to be made ignorant by a very reductionist narrative. And I would hope that people would not avail themselves of that kind of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we're going to talk about that first. We'll kind of dive into the history of ivermectin. So
Yeah.
this drug was actually discovered in the 1970s, which was a good decade, as as I issued forth into the world in the 1970s. So anyway, it was discovered based on the Nobel Prize-winning work by Satoshi Omura and William C. Campbell. So these were two scientists that sort of elucidated the drug or the structure of ivermectin, and it was originally used as an antiparasitic, which is really gaining steam today because we have, how like in the functional community especially, we'll have these bugaboos that come up, and it's sort of like the condition du jour, and parasites are very much in the public eye right now, and in functional spaces everybody is talking about parasites. And I I don't like to be too super dogmatic about anything. I like to tell people, well, this is what I think right now, but I always reserve the right to change my mind when new information comes. And that's kind of where I'm standing on the whole parasite thing. And you'll see why, I think, by the end of this podcast, because we're going to cast a really broad net in the discussion about ivermectin and all of the things that it does in the body. I mean, this compound is literally flipping switches far and wide within the human body, within within viral and parasitic genomes. Like, there's all kinds of stuff going on as a result of contact with ivermectin. And so, um again, originally used and developed as an antiparasitic, which it was used to successfully treat the parasite that causes river blindness. It was used to treat strongyloides, or the agent that causes strongyloidiasis. Also, it was originally useful for scabies and lice. So, unfortunately, scabies and lice, they have sort of evolved, this micro evolved some level of drug resistance against a lot of our agents now. And we pretty much use permethrins and pyrethrins now when we're treating scabies and lice. And these are extracts, they're analogs of an extract that we get from chrysanthemum or ragweed. And this is why some people don't do well with permethrins or pyrethrins if they have a ragweed allergy. So, but all the stuff that you find for scabies and lice is going to be based on permethrin or pyrethrin. Um, Not ivermectin now. Now, that's not to say that we might not be able to recycle its use in the future, because we've seen that with various antibiotics where we're able to recycle some of the older antibiotics, and they have increased utility after it's been some time since we've used them. So it may come around again. And then of course there is this widespread veterinary use, because animals get parasites as a matter of course, right? There's
Hmm.
tons of parasites that horses get, that dogs get, that cattle gets. Um, so we use ivermectin successfully in treating those as well, but it was very much developed as a human medication. In fact, so much so that it received the Nobel Prize. So anyway, moving on. Moving on before I get sarcastic about it. So ivermectin works as an antiparasitic. So let's talk a little bit, and I'm going to try to stay out of the biochemical weeds because I know people don't enjoy that as much as I do. But I want you to kind of know the way that it works, because I'm going to elucidate some of the ways that it works in the human body as well. So one of the things that it does, it's we used to think that it was very selective for invertebrates, and that's what worms are. Like, literally, parasites are often worms, and
Hmm.
worms have no spine, so they are literally invertebrate. Okay, so we are vertebrates, worms are invertebrates. They have no bones, they have no bone structure, and so therefore, taxonomically speaking, they are labeled as invertebrates. So we used to think that the ivermectin was selective for invertebrates. And the way that it works is by inhibiting chloride ion channels. Now, that's some kind of scientific speak, but the result of inhibition of those calcium ion or chloride ion channels is that it causes paralysis and death. So it inhibits the worm from being able to move. So
Mm.
it freezes the microtubules that are responsible for a worm being able to, move around. Um, and it essentially causes paralysis and death because the worm is not able to engage in all of the activity that is required to keep it alive. So, what we know now, though, is that ivermectin also has an impact on the host and potentially on other infective organisms. And so, what I want to say is that, our own mammalian cells we make use of chloride ion channels for all kinds of things within the body. And so to think that it only works on an invertebrate chloride ion channel, um, we know now that it doesn't, that it has much broader activity. So what I want to talk about next, now we use this as a anti-parasite. And actually, let's see, where in my notes? I wanted to talk just for a second about some of the protocols, but I think it's further down in my notes that I made for today. So anyway, hopefully we'll get back to that. But yeah, there are some parasitic anti-parasitic agents that are being used together. Um and ivermectin is certainly one of them, and we're seeing some really interesting things, so we'll get to that here in a little bit. But the next thing I want to talk about is it works. You're just laughing at me. It works. It squirrel. It works as
Yes.
an antiviral. So viruses like HIV, dengue fever, and lo and behold, COVID, they all
Oh.
use the important alpha slash beta 1 complex to transport viral proteins into the host cell nucleus. So I want you to think about this. So the power of a virus is that it and I'm going to make a broad generalization here. Viruses, they come in lots of different shapes and sizes, and they come with lots of different like structural parts to them. So I'm going to overgeneralize here. However, stay with me just so that we don't get too complex. But essentially, what the virus needs to do, like the active part of a virus is the genetic material. So what a virus's job is, once it infects a host, its sole purpose is to inject its nucleic acid or its genetic material into the nucleus of its host cell. So if that host is a human, then that virus it needs to get its genetic material into the nucleus of the host cell that it preferentially infects. So, for instance, something like a common cold virus, right? They infect cells of the nasopharynx. All right. A cold virus is not going to infect liver cells. Does that make sense? It's going
Hmm.
to infect cells of the nose and of the pharynx, right? Because that's where we see the common cold manifest. Okay. So with every virus has its preferred cellular target, but at the end of the day, it's trying to get its genes into the nucleus of the host cell. Then it performs this like takeover event. It actually messes with your own cell nucleus and cellular machinery, and it will take over that cell. They're kind of like pirates. Like they take over the cell and they force the cell then to start making their genes instead of human genes. Okay. So
Okay.
I'm sorry, and I mean, no, translation, transcription. Anyway, it's all part of the genetics here, but it will start to make viral proteins. That's a better way to say it. It will start to make viral proteins with your own cell. Your own cell will be taken over and turned into like a zombie cell that creates viral proteins instead of human proteins. Okay. Now, here's the really cool thing about ivermectin. So I talked about that important alpha beta 1 complex that transports those viral proteins across into the host cell nucleus. So ivermectin inhibits that process. And so what it does is it can prevent the replication of the virus within the body. So it keeps the virus from being able to infect the host cell, and then once if it makes it into the host cell, it prevents replication from occurring. So the virus can't force your cell to start making its own components to build
Hmm.
more viruses. Does that make sense?
I think so.
I just really wish that I had a dry erase board right now because my preferred method of getting anything across to anyone is a dry erase
Maybe for
board.
this episode, you could have a dry erase board and do an
There.
Instagram reel for
Oh,
everybody.
yes, that's not a bad idea. I'm also a terrible artist, but I do love a fresh set of dry erase markers. So
Yes.
anyway, so I also wanted to say that back to those ion channels. So viruses also use these ion channels on mammalian cells in order to transport their own particles into our cells. And ivermectin blocks those. Okay.
Okay.
So the another way that it works as an antiviral is with immunomodulation. So some of you, your wheels are turning out there because anytime that we talk about immunomodulation, we talk about a possibility for autoimmunity, for chronic
Mm-hmm.
inflammation, for those kinds of things. It all is wrapped up in that. So in terms of being an antiviral, it can immunomodulate the human immune system and it will enhance type 1 interferon response. So, interferon, I was always taught, like back 1,000 years ago, that interferon literally interferes with viral replication. So when you see the word interferon, you can remember that it interferes with viral replication. So your body's response to a virus is to push out all of this interferon. Okay. And that is to keep the virus from replicating so that it makes you sicker and sicker and sicker. That's how we clear viruses, is with our own endogenous interferon. Okay. So ivermectin can induce your body to create more type 1 interferon, which goes after the virus. So that's pretty cool. Like, that's a completely unique mechanism than any of the other mechanisms we've been talking about. Like, so far, I've presented probably four different and separate mechanisms of action for ivermectin within the human body, and that's crazy. And I'm not even close to finished.
Ah.
So there's so much stuff. So you're probably getting the idea that this drug does a ton of stuff in the body, and it does. So one of the more exciting things I want to talk about next is we see that it causes some dampening of inflammatory impact in the body. So we can see inflammatory markers go down when we've given ivermectin. Well, why the heck is that? Well, and in fact, there is a dermatological disease called rosacea that is as a result. Like, it literally, if you've seen someone with rosacea, it's like the body is wearing its inflammation on the outside. Okay, it's these real angry bright red cheeks. And it can almost, and people that suffer with rosacea, it's I feel bad for them because often, people will say, "Oh, did you get a sunburn? Oh, have you been out in the sun?" Because it literally looks like you have a
Mm,
sunburn right across
yeah.
your cheeks and your nose, but it's not. It's this inflammatory skin condition that is
And is it
that
usually
people really struggle
painful?
with. It can be painful. It can be a little raw. But essentially rosacea is an inflammatory driven disease and or condition, and it's often so. Being in functional medicine, the first place that I go to treat rosacea is I look at the gut, because it's
Mm-hmm.
often an outward sign of the health of the gut. So that's what I go after first. But I'll tell you something really interesting, is that there is an FDA approval. See, this is all the people talking about horse paste. They didn't tell you this either. That there is FDA approval for rosacea, or for ivermectin
Ivermectin.
topical to treat rosacea. Okay, I'm sorry, there isn't a horse alive that has rosacea. So sit down. Um, so Anti-inflammatory. So how do we treat rosacea with something like ivermectin?
Mhm.
Well, it works as an anti-inflammatory. So there are several, I mean, my gosh, when you think about, we talk about inflammation as kind of like this one thing, but there's like a zillion ways to become inflamed, right? The body
Yeah.
has lots of different ways to inflame. And we can't live without being able to inflame ourselves, because that is how the body clears certain things, is through inflammation, right? Disease, damage, oxidative stress, etc., has to be resolved through inflammatory processes. So one of the most famous inflammatory cascades is called the NF kappa beta pathway. So NF kappa beta, when you think about compounds like flavonoids, the most commonly used is curcumin. Okay. So we use curcumin as an anti inflammatory specifically because curcumin inhibits this NF kappa beta pathway. Well, guess what? Ivermectin does too.
Hmm.
And the long term impact of that is that you reduce inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 6, interleukin 1 beta, TNF alpha. This is tumor necrosis factor alpha. These are all really well known and well studied inflammatory mediators. Like, these are inflammatory cytokines that are produced in response to inflammation, and they're not good for us long term. So we see all of these elevated in people who have long COVID. Now, that may have different outward, like, if you have 10 people with long COVID, I can almost guarantee you that every single one of them is going to have a little different presentation, right? Because the weak links are going to be different in every single person.
Mhm.
So, in long COVID, if we can go upstream, upstream, upstream to the source of the inflammation, then we can see improvements in all sorts of different manifestations of long COVID. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Well, and we talked about this with our in our episode with Dr.
oh,
Endomater.
yes, that's right. That's right.
Mhm.
When we talked about long COVID.
Yep.
Exactly right. And so that's why, in fact, my way of thinking is that this is one of the reasons that ivermectin is a mainstay of long COVID protocols. I use it with patients who have long COVID. Um,
Now, are
and
you
mhm,
do you use it, internally or topically for them, or
always internally.
okay.
Always, because we need that systemic, because these pathways that I'm talking about right now, these inflammatory pathways, they are all internally.
Mm,
So everything that I've talked about so far is going to be an internal administration of ivermectin. However, with the caveat that the rosacea, there is an FDA approval on topical ivermectin to treat rosacea.
and
Okay.
are they actually calling it ivermectin or something else?
No, they're calling they have to call it ivermectin. There's no way around that. So you can't, so you know what? People in the know, they can't plead ignorance. Uh, you know, th- this is a known thing. This is a known thing. That was purely a political stunt, the whole
Yeah,
horse-based thing.
yeah.
Um so let's see. The next pathway I wanted to talk about. So there are a family of inflammatory signaling pathways called that utilize toll-like receptors. Okay, so again, not to get too far in the weeds, but toll-like receptor signaling can be modulated by ivermectin. So this is yet another way that ivermectin suppresses inflammation or mediates inflammatory signaling. So another thing that ivermectin does in the body is it's been shown to lower oxidative stress markers. So I know that we've talked about oxidative stress. We've talked about reactive oxidative species in the body, or ROSs.
Mhm.
These things that create physiological stress in the human body, ivermectin has been shown to lower the burden of those oxidative markers in the body. So that leads to an overall lower level of inflammation. Now, the final thing is that it modulates T cells. So your immune system, the immune system is one of the most complex systems in the whole entire human body. And I think it is still very poorly understood. But we do know that there are two basic arms of the immune system. There's the T cell side that originates in the thymus, and then there's the B cell side that originates in the bone marrow. So the T cell response, this is going to largely be the overall response. This is sometimes called the non-specific side of the immune system, where we're not creating antibodies to very specific things. We're actually just going out and bombarding anything that is not self, right? So, therefore, T cell response is involved in a lot of autoimmunity. Okay.
Yes.
So, when T cell response is elevated or kind of out of control, this can worsen autoimmune disease. And we find that a lot of people in a post viral infection state have increased T cells. They are hyper responding. And so they just sort of stay in this chronic state of inflammation due to this T cell response. Now, ivermectin can modulate that response because we don't want to completely take it away, right? If you have no T cells, that's a problem, right? You are immunosuppressed and you are much more susceptible to cancers and death by all sorts of infective agents. So we have to modulate. It's Goldilocks, like so
Mhm.
many other things in the body. It's a Goldilocks value. It can't be too low, it can't be too high. So ivermectin helps to modulate that T cell response.
So, just, talking out loud and
Hmm.
like as we talk about somebody with autoimmune that might, have done some extensive protocols like an elimination diet and maybe
Hmm.
not with you necessarily, but they quote unquote have tried it before and they didn't find anything that was causing a massive response when they did
Okay.
the elimination diet.
Uh-huh.
Would something like pairing, getting rid of gluten for sure and potentially even dairy, but pairing that protocol with ivermectin potentially help either speed up the process of like not curing, but reducing the inflammation of
Hmm.
autoimmunity.
Yeah, potentially so. So, Ashley, do you remember when we did a couple of episodes, maybe one episode? Anyway, low dose naltrexone, right?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Just one.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So the low dose naltrexone episode, we talked all about the immunomodulatory effects
Yes.
of low dose naltrexone.
Hmm.
Okay, and we don't really even know why it works,
Right.
but it's immunomodulatory only at those very low doses. Well, ivermectin also is immunomodulatory. And so when I look at my toolkit that I have, which is growing by the way, for
Yes.
people with autoimmunity, um, I have low dose naltrexone. I have dietary changes. I have stress reduction exercises. I have vagal stimulation.
Yeah.
I have breath work. And I now have ivermectin in my toolkit as well. So, yes, that is exactly true. That ivermectin can potentially be a part of an anti inflammatory protocol that you would give to somebody that has autoimmunity. And you believe I have used it before in folks
Hmm.
and it's done some good. And so, yeah, autoimmunity is incredibly complex, multifactorial beast. And so it can't be resolved almost 100% of the time. I'd say it cannot be resolved with just one thing. There's no magic bullet for autoimmunity, but if you can find the right set of circumstances, the right set
Hmm.
of interventions, often you can put it in remission.
Wow.
and
So cool.
ivermectin can be part of that. So yeah, and this and my gosh, back in the 70s, this was nowhere on the horizon. Like we just thought it was this amazing antiparasitic, right? But
Yeah.
it does so many things, and this is why repurposing old drugs, we in the functional community, like we're all about repurposing old drugs, because old drugs, they are like gosh, they are like a baseball bat, where today's drugs are like a scalpel.
Mm,
Okay. So
yeah.
today's drugs are very, very precise. They have like one molecular target. Old drugs, they go after all kinds of molecular targets. Like they do so many things in the body,
Yeah.
for good and for bad, right? Some of them were
Right.
terrible, some of them were
Right.
deadly. But we can go back to those old agents and see, like, hey, is there any potential efficacy with these older agents, not for maybe what they were originally prescribed for, but
Right.
could there be some efficacy with what we're dealing with now? And often there is. So that's one of the reasons why so many of us were so frustrated at the just the complete shutting down of anyone that asked a question about ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, colchicine. I could go on and on with the old repurposed drugs, but I'll tell you, if there was any study into those, and if it was found that they had any efficacy as treatment options, then there would have been no emergency use authorizations given.
Hmm.
So, anyway, that's all that I will say about that. The next thing that I want to talk about is cancer protocols. So, did she say cancer? I thought this
I
was an
know.
antiparasitic. Yes. So this is really interesting, you guys, and I'm watching this space so closely because I'm fascinated by it. But you all have probably heard at this point, if you're in these functional spaces at all, there's been like quite a kerfuffle about some of these antiparasitic agents. In particular, there's one called fenbendazole that has been used against cancer. And there's some really quite miraculous studies that are, well, or not studies. I'm going to say case studies. So these are individual cases. There is no peer-reviewed literature about this that I know of. And in fact, because these are old, cheap drugs, nobody has any reason. There's no money to be made here. They're
Right.
completely off patent and have been for decades. So there's nobody that stands to make $1 billion by studying these for new protocols, right? But there are people who are using fenbendazole. They're using different types of anti-parasitic agents, to include ivermectin, in cancer protocols. Now, the reason that I'm so interested in them is because these drugs are really, really safe and well tolerated.
Hmm.
And so when you think about what we use to treat cancer now, are those
Yeah.
drugs safe and well tolerated? No, they're
No.
not. They're not well tolerated at all. They cause horrendous side effects. However, when you're trying to kill something that's trying to kill you, you can expect some fallout. But if
Exactly.
can you even imagine, like, if we could treat this with a safe agent? That's
Yeah.
that's kind of mind blowing.
Well, safe agent coupled with a complete dietary
Mhm.
overhaul,
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
lifestyle
Um,
change. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
But
And
again, to your point, no money made.
that's, yes, precisely, precisely. And there are, yeah, there are, and I'll just mention it here because I don't think I see it in my notes. I must have written it some other place, but um, there are a couple of agents that are being used for parasite protocols, for cancer protocols, but fenbendazole is one of them. Ivermectin is one of them. Tinidazole is one of them. Let's see. I would say that ivermectin and tinidazole are probably the easiest to get. Fenbendazole has been a little bit difficult for people to get. I have looked for it not because I was going to order it for anybody, but I just wanted to see if it was even available. And I came up empty-handed, so I'm not
Huh.
sure where people are sourcing this, but it's a very interesting agent. There are some ways to get it, but not for human use. So it's kind
Okay.
of a wink wink kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, though, that's watch that space if you're interested